Hello, everyone. Happy Ahsoka Tano Day, aka Best TV Character Ever Day, and welcome to the Iron Canon Podcast, your home on the Star Wars Underworld Podcast Network for in-depth discussion on the lore, the High Republic, the whole canon, and in this case, legends of the galaxy far, far away. My name is Matthew, and I'm joining you from Underworld North Studio here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. As always, I'm joined across the continent by your friend and mine, Mr. Joel Davis. Joel, how are you doing this week?
I am doing great, and my cat is doing good
There we
too.
go. Right on, right on. Yeah, as the description says, 1999 to 2005 was an exciting time for Star Wars storytelling. It was my favorite era, as we'll see. George Lucas was in the throes of giving us a whole new trilogy, fleshing out characters and plot lines, showing us new and familiar locations, and fundamentally shifting our sense of what this Star Wars thing was in the first place. This week, we do look at how the prequel films affected the expanded universe stories written at this time. And to help us out, joining us, not from across the continent, for me at least, not even from another province. He's from Canada's own capital city of Ottawa. It's Corey from Tap Cafe Transmissions. Welcome to the Iron Canon Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Even more north than quarters north for you.
This is true. This is true. Yeah, further north, colder. One of the coldest capitals in the world.
Coldest, the highest range of temperatures. We got that honor.
That's true.
And very little else going for us.
Yeah, it's nice. It's very walkable. The Parliament buildings are nice. I enjoyed them. I haven't been in Ottawa in a while, but I do remember I was there. Be there in the summer, so I did an internship downtown.
Good, that's the right choice.
Yeah. Well, so I did an internship downtown, and it started it was a semester. It started in September, and it was warm enough there in September. But then, of course, I did in December.
Yeah.
So there we go. I haven't been to Ottawa. I got to go back there. I got to visit back there. Anyways, thanks again for joining us on the pod. We'll get our plugs out of the way first. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at Ion Canon Pod, EYEONCANONPOD. Yeah, that's Twitter, Instagram, Threads. The only Star Wars podcast. So I'm actually going to get to this on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel. There are 3 podcasts on this YouTube channel. I'm in 2 of them. I'll get to the second one in a minute. Here on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel, we got super chats, we got YouTube memberships. So please do support us if you're so inclined. Super chats, if you comment, donate, and support the channel, support the network. Your question, your comment will get bumped to the top of the queue. Also, the Star Wars Underworld Discord server. You can get in there chatting about a whole bunch of stuff. Joel, what's going on in the Discord lately?
This week, we'll be having another game night. We are going to be playing Fall Guys, something we haven't played in a while. That won the vote for this week's game night. Of course, we also have been having the grand Star Wars Watch Marathon, where we watch every on-screen thing that is canon in chronological order, and we're still on Young Jedi Adventures.
There we go. Yes, it's gonna take a while. We got a super chat. There we go.
Couple years.
There we go. Yeah. So yeah, welcome, Corey. Breaking the dough for us, please.
It will be a couple years. I know that.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, fair enough. That rewatch will definitely take some time. Well, you got to plan until when the at least the Rey film comes out or something like that. So we'll see.
I mean, there could be anywhere from 1 to 7 Star Wars shows this year, so you never know.
That's true. It's true.
What is definitely coming out this week are Star Wars comics on this Wednesday, of course. Dr. Aphra, number 41. Number 41, number 40, number 40. I can't count. Number 40, the end of the line for at least this run of Chelly. So yeah, Chris Abbott and I are going to be chatting all about that, all about the Aphra run, all about some Much Ado About Nothing news as well. So check that out right here on this channel. That's the second podcast I'm in. Second Star Wars podcast.
Much Ado About Nothing.
Yes.
It's funny when you mention about much, like I'm taking the theater class, and we just mentioned that play.
Yes.
So
it's in the zeitgeist. It's in the zeitgeist. So check that out on this Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We're going to talk about Aphra. That's all we're going to talk about. But also the week afterwards, February 7th, 2024. Star Wars Podcast Day. Gonna join in the fun. We're gonna join the fun by having Ethan Sachs on to chat all about bounty hunters, all about probably Galaxy's Edge and Galactic Star Cruiser comic he wrote. I'll probably a little bit of the Django comic, see what he can do. So yeah, that we're excited for. We're gonna make a big push for that. So check that out also right here on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel at 9 p.m. Wednesday, February 7th, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Wednesdays are for comics. Comics are for Wednesdays. So keep that ball rolling. Got to keep that ball rolling. Happy to do so. But back to the Ion Canon podcast. We got this week in Star Wars. Corey, I'll turn it to you. Well, how have you been enjoying Star Wars? What about Star Wars have you been enjoying this week? And yeah, any thoughts and feels about it?
So this week I've actually been working on modding some Empire at War, which has dominated my life for about 17 years now. So if there's any Empire at War fans out there, we've got a new version of our Clone Wars era mod coming out, which I guess is pretty topical for what we're talking about tonight. So yeah, a lot of battle droids and clone troopers in my life recently.
Now, forgive my ignorance here. That's is that an online thing or is that a?
That's an old RTS game.
Okay.
So it's in the lineage of your rebellions to your galactic battlegrounds into Empire at War.
My childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's online or is it a board game or is it
it's a like single player mostly.
Okay.
4X game. Like
Computer.
You run the Empire, Rebellion, or fleet battles, army battles. It's got a little bit of everything, but it's
yeah, that's pretty fun, pretty exciting. Joel, what do you think? What's going on in Star Wars for you this week?
Well, this week I have been doing some thinking in honor of Legends thinking and how all the canon does or does not work together, depending on who you talk to. And I've been thinking about the one thing that I kind of like about Rise of Skywalker over Dark Empire. So you gotta understand, I love Dark Empire. First Dark Empire is like one of my favorite comics. I unabashedly am a Dark Empire stan. Okay, I am a big Dark Empire stan. But the thing about Dark Empire is that it has this weird placement in the wider Legends continuity, where it's like smushed kind of in the middle between the original Thrawn trilogy and then the entire rest of the post-Endor era. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, which we'll probably get into a little bit in later discussion. So in the grander scheme of things, it kind of just has this weird feeling of like Palpatine comes back, and then he dies, and they come back 2 more times, and then he dies again. And then Luke had a bunch of adventures and the big Yuzong Vong invasion, and then Jason Solo turns evil, and then it's like it makes Palpatine come back like a little blip in the radar. It's like, oh yeah, remember that one time Palpatine came back? We had to defeat him again? That was weird.
One time.
Technically 2.
Luke looks like David Bowie.
Yes, David Bowie. Luke. It was all great. But the thing about Rise of Skywalker that I kind of find interesting is because it's set 30 years after the original trilogy, we're kind of almost retroactively making it like the final crescendo of like the return of the Empire. Mm-hmm. Like if we include the Mandoverse and Aftermath and then the sequels, it's like this interesting arc of like the Empire trying to just come back, and its last gasp is with the actual Emperor coming back as a zombie, and then he gets defeated. I don't know. I like that one aspect of that over the original Dark Empire in terms of like the wider Legends material and how it kind of played out. But Corey, I'd love to get your thoughts on this like kind of look at it, because I know you like Dark Empire. You did podcast.
I like
on
1
it.
and 2. Empire's End is a little. I could have lived without Empire's End.
That is fair. I mean,
that Empire's End, the Chuck Wendig Empire's End is fantastic. Sorry.
The third comic between Dark Empire 2 and Crimson Empire, but I mean, I think part of that, though, the flip side of it is that it guarantees that those 30 years now have to be stories about the Empire versus the New Republic to some extent. Whereas having it a bit more compressed, like you ended up with in Palpatine coming back in like 10 or 11 ABY, then even though you did still get another 15 years of Imperial stories, plus the whole, actually the Empire are the good guys now, because we've decided that, like, I don't know, fascism is sometimes okay as long as they don't have wizard powers while they're doing it,
Pelion's a good guy.
then he'd like to think that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot more room for more Imperial stories, which is we'll see how many of those we end up actually needing. Whether they actually fill that all in or not is separate from the amount of time they have. So
That's fair.
Yeah.
That is fair. Yeah, this is just sort of like a very extensive Bantam era. But yeah, I can see that. I can see that. Sort of pick your poison, I guess, a little bit to some extent. But no, that's just sort of my thought.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely
Fair enough.
just on that whole what's the trajectory in this time period. They've done a good job. It's only been coming up to 4.5 years, 5 years since Mandalorian, and since Rise of Skywalker, of just holding off on too much in terms of cloning and dark arts and all that. Right? They've hinted a little bit everything with Grogu. They've hinted a little bit with Grogu. Hinted a little bit with Mount Tantus and Omega.
And Thrawn and his dark magic
and
friends.
Thrawn and Gideon, but they haven't really done a lot, and they've really just slowly piecing things in, seeding things in, I should say. And what I've said before is that they're luckily not going to just be a full blown. I'd be surprised if in this season of the Bad Batch, Palpatine says, "Yes, this mountain with this clone kid." Who turns out who's actually a girl clone somehow. She's force sensitive. She's my plan for eternal life. I'd be very surprised, and I'd be very surprised if in Mandalorian Grogu or in the Mandoverse, there's somebody in working for the Empire saying, yes, this is part of Operation Cinder, or rather the contingency or whatever, saying, yes, this is our plan to bring Palpatine back. Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge. I'd be very surprised if they did that. At least, not for a long time, not for a few decades or
That's
decade
fair.
or so.
That's fair.
But but the thing is, we're supposed to be talking about it. I'm supposed to be on YouTube saying this is probably something to do with something. Pointing.
We get paid for it.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a straight line from we're doing this thing now and Palpatine comes back later. It's like 7 different individual technologies that make like a giant Megatron of Palpatine or
right.
Giant Megatron. Well, that's great. I love it.
Not Megatron. Anyways, whatever the Power Rangers made.
Oh yeah.
Megazord.
That's
there we go. A dark arts cloning Matrix spider in the back Megazord thing. Great. It's nerdy. It's good. It's fine. It's fine. There we go.
What about you, Matthew? What's your week in Star Wars?
Yeah. So not too much. I got to the episode with the clone trooper in How I Met Your Mother. I always enjoy that fact that instead of just a generic story, so in Barney's apartment, first time we get to Barney's apartment. No, this is I'm on my 3rd rewatch of this show. It's my favorite sitcom ever, and I'm on my 3rd. Yeah, and they get to Barney's apartment finally, and he calls it a stormtrooper. Lily calls it a stormtrooper, but really we know it's a 501st Phase 2 501st clone from that's supposed to, like what we see in Anakin taking on the Jedi Temple in Order 66, right? Revenge of the Sith. Because this episode came out in 2006. They're like, no, let's not give a generic stormtrooper. Let's actually plug the prequels some more. Say, remember the prequels are actually part of the main story here. Let's have that in and infuse that and seed that in again. So that was a fun, exciting moment. I always get happy when I come across that. Of course, it's a hilarious show. And if you haven't seen that, and Star Wars fans, that's one of those things I think that is definitely Star Wars adjacent that Star Wars fans should watch all the way through, because it's also the Last Jedi of sitcoms. You think this is what a sitcom is? You think this is what a love story is? Well, too bad. It's something else. Spoiler-ish alert. But I don't know if either of you, I don't know, Joel, you haven't seen How I Met Your Mother.
I have.
I don't know, Corey, have you seen this?
I have. I think that clone trooper might not have the happiest fate.
No, I don't. I know he gets replaced by a standard, boring old originalist stormtrooper, but yeah, there you go. I did put there we go. While we're on it, just as a complete tangent, without spoiling anything, what did you think of the ending of How I Met Your Mother?
I mean, my friend group had like a bet going on over what was going to happen. So I think
Yeah.
most of us kind of knew where that was going, except for one who was very in denial and thought like something else was going to happen entirely. That's difficult to talk about without just spoiling the whole show. But I feel like that show gave me like some sort of existential crisis that lasted for years. Like that it can't. Yeah, there's pure
fair
spoilers
enough.
if I go to that.
Yeah, fair enough. That's I can see that. And that's definitely a tangent of a tangent, but like it's an example of like the Last Jedi of sitcoms where again you think you know how this is going to turn out and then it doesn't. I love it. It's my favorite sitcom ever. Secondly, I'm about 2/3, 3/4 of the way through Galaxy's Edge Black Spire. I've gotten to the point, just past the point where this new character named Zaid, and he comes into Oga's cantina, and all the booths are taken, and so he has to stand at this stupid stand place thing and just lean on it. And I related so much. He's like, oh, why can't I just sit down? Because when I was in Oga's cantina after a long day of walking around rocking around Black Sparrow Post, walking around Disneyland, I just wanted a place to sit down and I couldn't. So
like 15
all
minute
that to say
there, I think, to drink maximum.
Maybe something like
Always
that.
full.
I don't quite remember that, but yeah, maybe. I mean, I only have like one, but yeah, at least if they'd given Zeta to drink maximum, then he wouldn't have. I don't know if I would have been able to spot him at the. There we go. So yeah, that's my thought there. Just the same. My copy of Escape from Valo, I could go pick it up from Back of Phoenix. I'll probably end up picking that up on Thursday. When I have time to go pick it up. And then I'll take a break from Black Spire and just start reading Escape from Valo. It's the junior grade phase 3, so I should be okay to read it fairly quickly and then go back into Black Spire. Although I have another book coming in, a nonfiction book that should be fun as well. That's completely unrelated to anything we talk about here. So yeah. That's kind of what I've been up to these lately. Corey, have you been doing High Republic at all, or?
Yeah, I've mostly been reading all of the adult novels and then a few of the young readers ones, but there's a bunch of those, and especially the junior ones that I need to go back and actually get to at some point.
That's interesting. What's it like just reading the adult novels as opposed to having everything filled out?
I mean, I don't feel like there's been anything where I've been unable to follow because of not reading everything, even though I don't have the same context for a lot of what's going on. Like the Drengir plot was kind of entirely tangential to anything in the adult novels, so I only got that from one of the young reader books that I did, and I haven't done any of the comics. So like I feel like I've gotten most of the major plot points for the Nile, at least.
Yeah, that's good to know, because I mean that was kind of what they were hoping for, was for it to be flexible that way. And I've heard mixed things about how for some folks it doesn't seem as flexible. I've read everything, so I
tend to find more often than not the idea that you're not going to understand if you don't read all of it comes from people who did read all of it. But I think Star Wars has always been pretty good. Like, look at episode 4, where one of the things the original trilogy did really well is that you're dropped into the story and you have a clear sense that there's other stuff going on, but the fact that you don't have that other context for these Clone Wars that Obi-Wan's talking about, or you don't even really know who the rebellion or the Empire are, like it feels like a lived-in universe, but you're not really lacking in the important information for the matter at hand.
Empire evil, rebellion good. I mean that's at that time, but I mean it's kind of when I at New York Comic-Con I bugged Charles Soule about his Image indie comic Undiscovered Country and what happened to Canada in it. And the premise of Undiscovered Country is that the U.S. has established this wall literally a wall around the country, and you cannot get in and you can't get out, which meant that Canada would be completely isolated and cut off from the rest of the world, we'd be dead. We would starve to death. Probably. Maybe not. I mean, there's other things. There's a whole airborne disease and all that. But anyway, I asked him, so how's Canada? How are doing? He said, oh, Canada's fine. Don't worry about Canada.
Got the St. Lawrence. Ontario's good.
Yeah, it's true. We got the river get it from Europe, get it in from Europe. But yeah, but just to say, we're stories, a good storyteller, an efficient storyteller can give us the information, like Charles Soule in High Republic, giving us the information we need. That's a good point. So yeah, that's it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to Escape from Valo. That's by Alyssa Wong and Daniel Jose Older. Alyssa has been tweeting every day what they'd send to Daniel DJO, and it's been fun. A lot of Taylor Swift references, so I'm happy about that. But
That's
looking forward to picking that up and getting back into phase 3 of High Republic.
So we got a little time. We got a question from the Book of Theories. Quick question: what are your hopes and theories on Bad Batch season 3? I mean, we did a whole episode last week where we just talked about, can't wait to see what Palpatine's doing. I hope all the Batch get a good characterization. Corey, do you want to just anything your hopes theories for Bad Batch season 3 while you're here?
Well, I've got a wild theory that Ventress is going to come back based on I mean, I've been saying since the finale of season 2, like many others, that Tech is completely fine, not just alive, like he's completely fine, not a scrape on them. And he's just I mean, the trailer has some possible implications for
I think
there's a guy who looks like similar proportions to Tech. But...
Really?
Yeah, one of those suits of mind controlledness. So, Tech might come back, but it might not be the way you want, and it's not going to be fun for him.
No, he's fine. Like, he's going to walk up, it's going to cut in exactly to where he fell, and he's going to be like, oh, where'd everyone go? Oh, well, starts camping, and then eventually they find him again. It's all good.
Yes.
That's interesting. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I hope they do a good job of that, but I mean, the emotional core where these characters are is seeing him fall to his death.
Well, Omega's also in captivity, so even if Tech turned out to be fine pretty quickly, I think the whole Omega situation is still a pretty big weight on all of them.
It is, yes.
And hopefully, my hope with Tech gone, as much as he is the best one, I do hope that means that Echo gets some attention that he hasn't had in 2 seasons of the show. Like Hunter took a bit of a backseat as well last season, which did mean that Tech could get some Tech and Wrecker to some extent could get some exposure that they didn't earlier on. But it's been good with different characters at different times, but there's never really been a point where all of them felt like they were all firing on all cylinders and everyone was super present in the story. So I'm hoping that's something that gets a bit more focus in the 3rd season.
Yeah, that's a good point. They haven't, like to just echo your point. They've all at different points. There have been different weight, different depth to each character at different times. It's been hard. It's hard to balance all those characters, but I mean, Rebels, they seem to manage it fine, and I mean, Clone Wars definitely managed it, but those Clone Wars was maybe 4 characters, but. Yeah.
Like you're always going to have like, this is a Tech episode, this is a Wrecker episode. And they might be leads in a different way in different episodes, but it's more that it was like a full season of you're only getting Hunter right now. And then a full season of you're only getting Tech and Wrecker right now. So,
I mean, they got to answer. Well, they're going to give Omega even more character. And that's the one exception to this is that she's always had more depth. I mean, like Ahsoka, like Ezra, right? She's like Kaz. She's the main character and happens to be a younger character, which is par for the course for Star Wars. So yeah, but I definitely get what you're saying. It'll be nice to see if the rest of those characters, if we can, I mean, if Tech comes back, what does that do to all the other characters? How do they respond? How does Crosshair coming back? So
I hope Crosshair gets out first and just has some time with the Batch before, in case they do kill him, at least he can have like a little bit of atonement before if he dies, instead of just I'm gonna throw the I'm gonna throw Dr. Hemlock off the rail, and now I'm dead.
But Joel, Star Wars doesn't give bad characters time to atone. It's not what they do. It's not what happens.
I know, but I'm serious. I hope.
No,
I hope.
I agree. It should be good. It would be good.
Crosshair has been kind of refreshing in that way, where like Alphabet Squadron did that really well. Bad Batch is doing it pretty well now with what they've done with Crosshair so far. Everywhere else, it's just like ontological good and evil that you flop between, and then you're. I guess if you throw one guy down a shaft to save your son, then suddenly everything you've ever done is fine, and he's going to tell everyone that you're actually a kind of okay guy. But
I'm just happy you used the word ontological. My goodness, I never thought I'd hear that. There you go. The philosophy of being.
I mean, Corey, we still haven't seen Force Ghost Anakin go to Luke and complain that Leia hadn't forgiven him because he did the thing.
That scene is.
We're talking about Legends book, Matthew, in case you're wondering.
That's great.
Yeah, that's how Legends handled Ghost Anakin.
I just got to deal with something.
The best part of that is like it's 5 minutes after the Battle of Endor, essentially. Like the book Truce of Bakura is set immediately after the Battle of Endor, and Vader is already Anakin is already coming to Luke using his first time back on the Force Ghost phone. Like Leia's still mad at me, and she won't take my calls.
It's a whole other year. So he's back to Attack of the Clones Anakin, is what we're saying here.
Yeah, like it actually turned out to be very in character for the Anakin we saw in the prequels, but it.
Again, that's why I love Ahsoka. I feel like Ahsoka did it right. It's like first time we see Force Ghost Anakin on screen. But we'll get to that. But yeah, I think with that, let's get to our main topic, shall we? The prequel's effect on the EU. So, so the prequels, those 3 films in the 90s, remember those? George
Never
came?
seen them. What are we talking about?
Early 2000s. See, I just called them the first part of the main calls. So,
but yeah, so for almost a decade, Star Wars had been living off its books and comics, building itself with like a post-Endor era and a little bit of a Tales of Jedi era of 5,000 years in the past. So Star Wars lore had been expanding for a while, and different authors like Mr. Mr. Timothy, came in with this blue guy of his, and Tom Veitch came and all that good stuff. And they kind of had their own takes on Star Wars, what these were, what the Clone Wars were, all this good stuff. And then eventually Lucas comes in. It's like, I don't care about any of that. I'm going to do my way. I'm going to tell the story of Anakin fallen dark side. He's going to start at 11-year-old. I say so. And
9-year-old?
9-year-old. I thought it was 11. 9. I'm sorry, 9-year-old. And gave his own takes on the world of Star Wars. And because of that, well, a lot of books had to shift, had to change course. And even though I have this lower in the notes, I guess that I can actually start with this question. And Corey is sort of as I consider you a chronicler of the history of Star Wars multimedia, an expert, a researcher. I'm gonna have to ask, how come they didn't do what they did when New Canon came along, which this Disney era, right, when they just not reboot the EU again and just kind of start off fresh to kind of have everything match up a little bit more? I kind of feel like I have an answer myself. I'd love to hear your thoughts on why they didn't go this direction, instead just continue to press on with NGO and stuff.
I think there's 2 primary reasons for that. The first is that they'd already established this soft or pretty hard rule of nobody writes a story in that period, even though they had like references to exactly what they were saying was going on at that point. So how hard of a rule was that really? But because there weren't any stories that were directly in that, other than you could say maybe some of the Marvel comics were claiming they were in that because of the very weird timeline with that, but nothing was explicitly, this is a Clone Wars story right now. And I think the second reason is probably the most important, and it's that there wasn't the same feeling that all these stories had to be part of one continuity yet. So that strengthened more as you got into the early 2000s, like 2010. So by that point, when everyone expects like these are all stories in the Star Wars universe, so it should all be one story, and continuity is that much more important. Not that it didn't exist, just that it wasn't, the emphasis wasn't there in the same way. Like George never really felt bound by them, partially as a result of that. It wasn't just a unique trait of George. Like you look at any other franchise, and this was a very rare thing to have all these different types of media telling the same story.
Yeah.
So the pressure just wasn't there to have it be that consistent.
That's fair. Yeah, and I can kind of see like kind of what we kind of got later on, because I have a lot of those essential chronology books and stuff like that, and Essential Guide to Warfare, where it's like you can say like, oh, after Endor, the Thrawn campaign happened, and that's how it connects back to the prequels, and then it's like, but then you actually read the Thrawn campaign, Thrawn talking about the Clone Masters, and Clone Wars happened 50 years beforehand. Now, that doesn't make sense, but Matthew, did you want to add something?
Well, just yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there had all those levels of canon, like G canon, A canon, and Q canon, and Z canon, and whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to note. They try, even just in new canon, whatever, after the changeover, just how much they tried to keep it up, and even then, it's now iffy, right? That they just kind of stay in their own lane. Yeah, it's a similar kind of thing where, to your first explanation, right, where books and comics are just not allowed to touch certain time periods that they're hopefully planning. Lucasfilm was thinking of writing into and talking about. But yeah, I mean, now there's it is an interesting difference that there was the attempt of tie-in material, that there also isn't that much anymore either. So yeah, I mean, your explanation makes sense. Right. I mean, but what I do notice, and what I do think maybe you're going to get into this a little bit. Joel, you mentioned, I think we were talking beforehand, or was it the beginning of this podcast? I don't remember. It was sometime half an hour ago. About the Republic comics, and how I think, with Shadows of the Empire, and then with Republic comics, and as storytelling, as this gets opened up, and again, I think we're going to get into this, as things get opened up, 1999, George says, yeah, you can start telling these stories, the Tartakovsky story, Clone Wars, all that. Then we do have a sense of this is sort of tying into things.
Right.
Even then, George isn't bound by it, but he's going to do what he wants. But there's still, I mean, maybe, yeah, there's that communication now established between, say, Lucasfilm licensing and what George is doing. This go between what George is doing and the authors can do, that eventually, of course, becomes the story group. But that wasn't the case at all in the 90s, right? Again, the Shadows of the Empire, but there wasn't a film. It was all one equal thing. So
right.
Yeah, so it's almost to say it wasn't just that it's not that they didn't do the switchover, but they did add, I think, my sense at least, because Republic Comics, because even Dark Times fits in well, that they did bring in something relatively new.
Yeah, and I guess we can talk into the next part, which is kind of the top. What? Sorry if you hear sounds. There's a helicopter going over my house.
All good.
Yikes. What was sort of, I guess, back to 1999? Like, what was kind of the state of what we call on Ion Canon, we call paper canon, which is anything that's not TV or movies. Because and you've talked about this on your podcast, how especially in the 90s, comics and books didn't always like to get along. That's the Dark Empire Thrawn trilogy kind of rivalry going on there, where they kind of didn't always communicate with one another, which is something I think a lot of younger book fans or just book comic fans might not be aware of, like, because I feel like the book and comic side are a lot more intertwined and a lot more of a cohesive unit. So Corey, what was the build up to that, and what was sort of like the state of it in 1999, where we finally starting to see them coming together a lot more as things got a lot more cohesive, at least on the non-film side of things?
I mean, it's always been a little funny to me that, like, Timothy Zahn's obviously like one of the Star Wars greats, and he's one of the ones that would get held up by a lot of people that are very continuity centric. But as an author, he's probably one of the ones that is least interested in doing that. Like the reason that the Thrawn trilogy is set before Dark Empire is because when asked to include stuff from Dark Empire, he was like, no, I'm not doing that. And he's always kind of viewed his books as their own kind of thing. So he tries to make them more consistent with each other between both canon and legends, and cares a bit less about what anyone else is doing in either of those. So like I think it gets exaggerated a little bit, but there was always some like tension that fans would reference between different groups of Bantam writers, because Bantam had the license in the 90s where like you had the shipping wars where like Zan and Stackpole and Alston would be on one side, and they're the ones that are doing like Luke and Mara. But then you have the Children of the Jedi side of things, and there's Callista over there, and like Mara gets retconned as having just been undercover with Lando rather than undercover with Lando. But 99, like right as the prequels were coming out, you started to see more of an idea that like, oh, let's have these tell one bigger story, and that's when you get the New Jedi Order, and like the license switches over to Del Rey. They want to have a big publishing push, so you start to get more of these projects where there is this idea of like, let's tell one connected thing, and that's kind of just what NJO ended up being.
Yeah, and you know, if me and Matthew talked ad nauseum of Tim Zonisms, I call them his
Zonisms.
His Zonisms, and
I mean that explains so much when
the
you
two
how.
Thrawns. And the two Thrawns, and like, well, no, go ahead, Matthew. I'm sorry.
Well, just say, explain so much how he's just, just a way of putting it, how he's just not interested in what other people are doing. I mean, in order to play ball and to get back into canon, he had to incorporate stuff from Rebels. But then he goes off and writes this Ascendancy trilogy, right? So just to say that there's this pattern that it feels so different. You know, even right until last Wednesday, we got the Thrawn Alliance's tie-in, and that felt it distinctive. And to his credit, it's a distinctive voice, very distinctive voice that has a pretty solid corpus, especially with Legends. But anyway, he has 6 canon novels now too. But how, it feels so out there and disconnected from everything that we know as Star Wars. And that's not, again, necessarily a bad thing. It's just, I mean, for those of us who like to fit things together and see how things are in conversation with each other, and it does raise, it's a little iffy, but then definitely the deeper questions of, is Pelion a good guy? Is, like we're saying, is can we cheer for Thrawn or not? And it's easier. That's another big thing in the EU, in Legends. Of course, Thrawn is still a villain, like he is in Rebels, whereas in the canon trilogies, he's kind of this protagonist, sort of. So yeah, it's funny. It's just again, I mean, the thing I think what I'm going to be doing a lot tonight is just kind of comparing what happened then to what is now, and it is interesting to see with Zahn how back then he was doing his own thing, but that was definitive of what a lot of paper Star Wars storytelling was. Whereas now he's doing his own thing. He is bringing things in. I mean, he talked like, we're getting this comic adaptation of this Anakin Vader Padme story. That's also a Thrawn story. That and then the fact that kind of weaving in and around Rebels, yet because we have the sense of everything else has happened on paper too, it is so different and off and out there. Yeah, it's tricky, and we haven't been. I don't know if we've been as generous or charitable to him, but and we could be critical. It's fine. He can handle it. But yeah, so it's Zonisms. It is interesting. Yeah,
I love. It's sort of funny. I might get some flack by certain people who say this, to say this. And it's not totally 1-to-1 because he's only done 2 Star Wars stories. And there's a little bit of difference, obviously. But Tim Don is kind of a little like J.J. Abrams that way. That he kind of does his own thing, although it's a little different, but it's not at the same time.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Where it's like he kind of not bothering with what everybody else is doing, but it's like in a different sort of sense. It's an interesting comparison for sure. But
here's the thought then.
Yeah.
Is if there is a parallel, and I'm going to go there, and I don't mean this way.
Mhm.
I mean, J.J. Abrams, so I talked about how J.J., how they tried to make everything connect, but again, J.J. just did his own thing, kind of like what George Lucas did, right? He's all,
That's
I'm going
true.
to tell my stories. There's all this paper stuff happening. I'm not going to read it. That's fine. Chris
that's fair,
Terrio, you can go ahead and read it if you want, but I'm not gonna. Yeah, it's there's maybe the parallel there to say, though. I mean, that's the thing over the last 2 years I finally had to come to is that the economics of the movie industry is so much bigger than the book industry. That the power of it and the power of storytelling is going to be such that you have to have someone like Leslie Headland to say, I'm actually reading these novels and I actually care what
Well,
happens. So
you especially look at when Zahn started, when all of them started, really, there were so many books that were released in such a short period of time. It was a bunch of mercenaries coming in, and they described themselves like that to write these novels. You read the acknowledgments, I think, on the Corellian trilogy, and they were written in like 3 months on train rides. Like there wasn't the expectation that they'd connect, and a lot of the authors wouldn't have read each other's stuff. And even now, it's always such a big volume of work that, like, the authors, for the most part, there's some that are like diehard fans and they're going to read everything, but that's not possible for everyone.
Not everyone's
And
James
so,
Lucino.
yeah. So a lot of them have like their other franchises they're working on, and like Zahn has his own work outside of Star Wars that he's working on. So it's not like he goes out of his way to ruin what other people are doing, but his preference is to tell his stories with his characters. And I think like his interpretation of Thrawn over the years has changed in ways that's impossible for anyone else to be consistent with. Because like in Legends, he was also going the direction of like, oh, well, Thrawn's actually a good guy already, and he's re-becoming the greatness he never wasn't. And it's a whole thing there. But like Matthew Stover is probably my favorite Star Wars author. In just like, he hasn't done as many Star Wars books, but they're pretty much all great as Star Wars books and as books. But even he in his interviews will say like, he's coming in, I'm doing a Star Wars, but also read all my other stuff because I'm here for like this is how I get my name out there, essentially. And for him, yeah, like for him, it was like he'll mostly do this is my character X book. So he has his Mace Windu book, his Jason book, his like episode 3 novelizations, the Anakin and Obi-Wan book. So if he's going to do research into stuff, it's going to be like a kind of a deep dive into one character rather than caring as much about the universe around it. And he'd do a character study. So like, I think it really does vary from author to author on how much they're going to research, how much it's reasonable to expect for their topic that they could research, and how much like they're going to pull from other universe elements to make their story.
Yeah, but what's interesting though about that is during the prequels, again, that's when the kind of the big publishing, the first real, well, I guess Shadow of the Empire is the first one, but the even bigger publishing kind of initiatives, I consider New Jedi Order a publishing initiative, happens. That's when New Jedi Order starts. That's when the multimedia project starts. Funny enough. And it's a little. I mean, this is kind of I would like to call it almost like the proto to High Republic, which I think at this point is probably the biggest publishing initiative they've done, and also probably the one that probably been like, I guess, on like regardless how like you feel about it, like objectively, I would have to say almost the most successful, because I mean, it's getting a TV show in Acolyte. But just in terms of like how much you can tell Lucasfilm, the studio, are kind of supporting it. Compared to NGO, which sadly kind of gets abandoned after it finishes. There are certain plot points that get dropped. But Corey, I guess I go to you. Was this always the direction we were heading, regardless of the prequels of these kind of big initiatives, or what did the prequels help this kind of like, okay, Star Wars is coming back in a big way. We need to come back in a big. We need to start pumping ourselves up for big thing. Star Wars is going to be back in the theaters and gonna have all eyes on us. In terms of NGO and stuff.
I'm sure the prequels coming was a big force behind NJO being able to get off the ground. Like, I don't know how long Star Wars would have been able to go as just a pure book and occasional game series. Like, it would always have some level of popularity, but
Mhm.
I don't think you would have had projects of that scale if there wasn't the expectations that the movie might come out and really bump those numbers up. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that that's when that happened.
Mhm.
I mean, the money. They
Yeah,
had the
that's
money
Yeah.
to do it. Is that? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we've talked about just not every author can do the research. But I guess, Matthew, in terms of just the High Republic,
Yeah.
I wonder if that just makes High Republic the exception, not the rule, because that is a initiative. That is a High Republic or a High Republic book, but it's
Right.
within the confines of a singular thing. So it's kind of like you kind of have to do the research because
Well, it's more
all
than
of
just
them.
research. Like they don't need to research. They're talking. They're literally talking to each
Yeah.
other, and they're on. They literally have a Slack chat. But I mean, you can tell someone like George Mann coming in that he had read all of Phase One
Mhm,
for sure. You can tell that. But that being said, with what we've talked about before,
mhm,
maybe even a year ago or two, there is a discipline of continuity, a harmony of continuity within paper canon
mhm.
that has actually held pretty consistently and pretty firm. And so it, even if anything, you'd have an author who maybe not necessarily have read everything, authors who haven't necessarily read everything, but
Mhm.
at the very least, they've read enough of, say, this character or this circumstance. At the very least, story group is going to say, well, you know this, you know that. But I think even just the way stories get developed in paper canon now, that a lot of them, yeah, some of them are, you see something on screen, you see Kira on screen, and Charles Soule is still going to write a crossover event involving her. And also, that's another interesting example of a team coming together. They probably literally had a Slack chat too with Greg
Yeah.
Pak and Alyssa Wong and them. So, and Ethan Sachs and Charles Soule, etc. So there's those conversations. I mean, I don't know. I wonder if like they wouldn't call themselves mercenaries anymore. They'd say there's a lot of mutual support, a lot of wanting to know what their colleagues are doing, wanting to know what their friends are doing. So there's that. Um, yeah, I will say, but well, all that to say then to maybe go back to your question, it makes if that pushes up this level of just collaboration conversation
Mhm.
because both because they want to and because the story group is going to make them. Um, how much more is this High Republic thing?
Right.
Just this unifying, ongoing collective.
Corey, do you want to
Uh,
respond?
that
Yeah.
has really brought everything together so nicely.
Right.
So yeah, I mean collaborative storytelling because I guess NJO was that just a single author or was that just
Oh
was it,
no.
it was multiple authors? Okay.
Yeah. So it was kind of, I think it is a good comparison to look at how they both work because I think like High Republic does show how it's evolved because now it is within each phase you have multiple authors telling kind of the same story, whereas with the New Jedi Order you were bringing together a lot of the authors that had written Star Wars books on their own before and a bunch of new ones, but it was still very segmented. So they had like the story summits when they were starting, and that included Del Rey authors, and it actually included Dark Horse as well. But I think the fact that Dark Horse didn't get included in their invasion storyline that they had pitched and only wrote the invasion comics 9 years later because they felt kind of jilted by how the process had gone and that they weren't involved in this and like telling their version of the story. Uh, like it clearly wasn't as connected as you'd have with High Republic now with the comics and books and even the TV show kind of being in the same realm. But if you look at the NJO books, there's 19 of them. There's like some that are standalone, some that are duologies, trilogies, but like every book has a very different tone. There's still the through line of like Luke and Leia and then the solo kids, but it's a lot of like a prior Star Wars author coming back to tell the story of what their character is doing in this period. So you have like the Corrin books, you have the Wedge books. Obviously, Wedge wasn't invented by any of the authors, but like X-Wing authors were coming back to write about their Rogue Squadron characters and Race Squadron characters, or like you had some of the new authors coming in and they're telling like the Force Heretic stories, and they're touching a bit on what other people had done, but it really was a lot of this is one story, then we're going to jump to the next story, then we're going to jump to the next. Whereas in High Republic, you have everyone telling whatever the major plot line is you're having within a duology or trilogy for the adult novels in a phase, or within the young reader series. You're getting a lot more collaboration and telling the same story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, with that being said, there is what we've said too. You know, that there are certain characters that authors are picking up through the whole thing. But I mean, maybe it isn't as. Would you say that NJO was more segmented that way? It was more like there's more. I don't know what the word would be. Not firewall, but just discrete. Like this author will only write these books, this character. Whereas if another High Republic author wants to pick up on this character, and they can, and they will.
Yeah, like with High Republic, I feel like you could read the phases individually, and you'd get a story within that phase, whether it's the junior or the young adult novels versus the adult novels, and like each of those will tell a story that's still a little segmented because it's a plot. Whereas in NJO, you'd have that being done by one person, and then the next person takes over. It's more like a relay race than a real collaborative. We're all telling different sections of this story together.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Well, as you know, to quote our buddy Dan Grievous, got the wild card himself, Mr. George Lucas, and kind of go back to the original topic, kind of to go back what we said, yes, I don't think they need to reboot the EU and to just tell New Jedi Order, but how New Jedi Order certainly develops is affected by the prequels. Because obviously George is giving the backstory, well, what the world galaxy was like before the original trilogy, with and he's kind of telling us here what the Jedi were like. Here's Anakin Skywalker, so we can't have Anakin Solo. That's an interesting story. Like here's even like the philosophies of Star Wars, and Corey, I guess since you're reading it, and you've talked about it a little bit on your podcast as well. As you've gone on through New Jedi Order, I don't want to make it just about New Jedi Order, obviously, but kind of that's sort of the biggest effect. Do you kind of see those prequel influences in terms of like, the philosophies that maybe George is bringing in with like the Force and stuff are coming in, and like obviously the big one I remember is like the Jedi, Luke's Jedi are starting to look more and more like the prequel Jedi in terms of like now we do wear the brown robes, and we got our council temple on Coruscant before it gets blown up, and kind of just even the mood of it kind of changes as well. Now that we kind of have to get the prequels, I think also kind of affect the tonal arc of Star Wars in a little bit. But what are your take on that in terms of just New Jedi Order and maybe the EU itself? If you wanted to expand beyond New Jedi Order.
So the New Jedi Order is interesting because it's releasing at the exact same time as the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. And I'd asked one of the authors, I think it might have been Troy Denning, whether they'd gotten any kind of access to prequel information while they were writing. And what he said was no, they were finding out about stuff in theaters the same way everyone else was. Because there's one of the opening battles feels a lot like the opening battle in Vector Prime feels a lot like the Battle of Naboo. And so it made me think like maybe there was a tie-in there. But like the Jedi Order is, the authors are learning about it at the same time as the audience is, at the same time as Luke is in the book. So you can kind of see that through line of Luke figuring out more about the Jedi, or getting access to information that he's found out about the Jedi that had been lost to the ages because no one knew before the movies had come out. So like if you're looking for that connection, like it's very much there in, because like the idea of like the Jedi just going around the galaxy as these kind of lone master apprentice pairs is how or even just individuals is how the NJO starts. But then you get the more organized, like Luke's in charge. We've got the temple. We've got like formally we're organized under Luke now. And yeah, so I don't think they got to Revenge of the Sith, and I don't think they had any information from Revenge of the Sith, but like everyone kind of knew what was going to happen in Revenge of the Sith. So once they had that information from Attack of the Clones and seeing the Jedi Order there, it all kind of came together for them.
Right. And I think one of my favorite is actually something after New Jedi Order was I think it's Swarm War, maybe Swarm War, where it's like, oh, now Luke finds out about what happened on Mustafar and his dad. Like R2 finally showed him the recordings after 30 years.
So funny. It's like, surprise! Now you find out.
This is what your dad looked like when he was younger. It's like this
Funny.
Caden Christensen.
Yeah.
But Matthew, would you like to?
No, it's just funny. That must have been a funny reading experience in real time. It's like
it's
like,
kind of dark. But not even just because you see the dad choke his mom. That's pretty dark as well.
Sure. Yeah.
But like
the actual
R2 has like a corrupted memory unit, and the whole plot is he's like Luke is trying to find someone who can unlock it. Yeah. And the whole time they're like, oh, if I do this, R2 could just get completely fried. And there's like an angry Luke saying, do it. Why are you hiding? Luke gets very aggro in those later periods. It's
yeah.
And people say,
no,
it's hashtag not my Luke Skywalker.
There we go. I was just gonna say it was just it seems like a funny reading experience of, we find out this thing, we see this movie in 2005, and then Luke's like, oh, turns out. Yeah.
I mean, that must have been. I mean, I don't know if any of us had this. I didn't because I'm too young. I don't know about you, Corey, if you didn't. I know, Matthew, you didn't read a lot of Legends, but like having that experience of like reading Bantam in the 90s and then kind of watching like, you're kind of read, like you kind of hear about the Clone Wars, their version of the Clone Wars. Right. And then at the actual Clone Wars come out, you're actually starting to see it kind of affect your book with New Jedi Order, which is also kind of one of many weird reasons people kind of jumped off of the EU after that. I mean, I like it all. It's fun. But, I guess, Corey, you could talk about, do you think the prequels also affected the tone of the post-Endor EU? And I talk a lot about the post-Endor EU a lot because I feel like that's the one I feel like you can see the effect of. I mean, maybe a little bit with the Old Republic stuff going on at the time, but it's like the post-Endor EU with like, you got your Warlord of the Week, as we call it, and then New Jedi Order comes, but just the tone darkens because the prequels' tone is kind of changing Star Wars as well overall to a little bit more bombastic. Obviously, with Revenge of the Sith being the most operatic of all of them. Like, do you think that was do you think if prequels had not happened, NGOs like tonally would have gone a different route?
No, I think the tone in NJO ended up a lot darker than the prequels, especially when like most of them were written with just the Phantom Menace, which even though we know Anakin's gonna be Vader, like it's a fairly light movie. Like there's a lot of Jar Jar going around. Like it's the most clearly oriented towards like having a stand-in at least for the kids. Where like they're all kids movies, but this is the one where there's like Anakin and Jar Jar are the ones that are there for the audience to really, as children, to like, oh, this is me doing this adventure, or look at the silly swamp monster guy, and like that one's not super dark yet. Then you get a lot darker in episode 2. But by then, I think Anakin had already been killed. Like Anakin Solo had already been killed. And like there'd already been PTSD Han after Chewbacca's death, which was like Han just becomes an alcoholic and abandons his family for 6 books. And it's the, so I think they were going as dark as they could at that point, because it was still like the idea of like, oh, there's stakes now compared to the Bantam books. Like no one ever really dies. If anyone's going to die, it's going to be character that just got introduced, like Han, Luke, Leia, and their best friend Johnny, who's been with them for we go way back. Oh no, Johnny's been killed, and like then they go back. Yeah, like
Johnny.
That's with Chewbacca dying and then Anakin dying, like they really wanted to they had a tone they seemed to know they wanted to go for.
Yeah. Yep, Red, you're right. Crix Mandine was probably the biggest death back in those days.
Interesting.
I've been thinking about it. I feel like kind of looking at it now, just kind of like from historical, I feel like then kind of post the prequels is when you start to see a little bit more of the effects of, I guess I call it prequelization of the EU even more so. because obviously, you got Swarm War stuff with, Luke, but you also kind of I look at sort of like the Old Republic stuff. Yeah, KOTOR came out, I think 2001, am I 2002? When
Something like
KOTOR
that,
1,
yeah.
when did KOTOR 1 come out?
OT,
Probably around that.
one of them.
Yeah, 102, because a little bit after Phantom Menace. And obviously, you're starting to see, like, aesthetically, like, 2002. Thank you, Red. Yep, 2002. Thank you. You start to see the, like the Star Destroyers look a little, but there's a little bit of a lot original design. And then you get to like post the prequels, 2008 with the Old Republic MMO, and then it's like, oh, we just got clones in the past now, and the
Yeah.
Sith Empire is just the Empire but with more Darth Vaders running around. So, do you think, kind of, in a weird way, it wasn't really during the prequels that we saw, I guess, prequelization, but more like afterward, where it's like, okay, now we got the whole prequels, let's go nuts. Was just that kind of aesthetic, and obviously Jedi versus merchandising.
Yeah.
Jedi versus Sith again with Jason Solo going dark side. But what do you think, Corey?
Spaceballs.
Yeah.
The prequels.
Yeah. Exactly. Like it's just the aesthetics of the prequels were how you sold things at that point. Like once you're into episode 3, like 2006 to 2009, that's kind of everything's hitting its stride. People want Jedi, people want clone troopers. You're going all in on anything that has those aesthetics. Whereas NJO was like right before then. So you start getting more of that in KOTOR 2's coming out with that. Like KOTOR 1 had the Jedi as the big thing. Everyone always loves Jedi. But then with Tor, it very much is, here's some Imperial and episode 3 aesthetics. Everyone come play this game that lets you be a Jedi, please. It works.
It works
for them.
I mean, it makes sense, right? And kind of pick up what you're saying, Corey, that it developed this interest. George did such a great job, I would say, of developing this interest of what the Jedi were about. And I mean, now I think authors and video game designers and authors were chomping at the bit to finally get in, sink their teeth into this. But that there was an appetite for it, an attitude, appeal to it, that George developed this interesting thing. Oh, they have this organization. Oh, they have this more time with meditating on what the Force is. You see what Qui-Gon is able to do. Just even before his duel with Maul, for example, you see Yoda and Mace Windu chatting about the to a dark place, and a sense of plot to destroy the Jedi, and how the Force can actually give Mace Windu that sense of a plot to destroy the Jedi. You see the relationship between the Jedi and the Republic, right? You see, I mean, all these things I love, right? You see, how both organized and how political the Jedi get. And yet you also see Obi-Wan, to be fair, and Joel, to continue to hear your criticism of my criticism in my head. You see them actually doing their best in this difficult situation. Everything, we could talk about before, the expectations, the weight of expectations going into the prequels, but afterwards you see everything we had kind of hoped for and imagined, maybe with Obi-Wan in the hut with Luke. We actually see it, and so okay, let's actually get more stories that explore this and delve into this. So I mean, I think that kind of gets it NJO a little bit, that they wanted to actually bring that back and tell more of that. It gets it, all the Old Republic storytelling, where there is that organization, those institutions, and that let's talk. We're at a time in real world history where we're really starting to talk about the complications of religious institutions, right? Just after the Bush administration, everything going on in the zeitgeist there, and how, I mean, I think with KOTOR, for example, with the comic, the JJM comic, how the Jedi are kind of iffy, kind of wonky, not terribly villainous, but like in the prequels, they're kind of morally gray. I won't say gray Jedi, but they're morally gray. And again, like I said, on both sides of things, and it definitely the appetite was there. I don't know if we got any sort of full on, I guess, creamsicle Jedi / like what we thought kind of Mace Windu was, but not really. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense that they finally able to explore these things again. I think the Republic. I haven't read much of the Republic comics, but when Dark Horse was able to really go in. It's from 2002 to 2005 and tell the story of the Clone Wars. And that those were successful comic books, right?
Oh yeah.
And there was a reason they continued. It became the Star Wars run. It was the Star Wars run that they renamed Republic. It became Dark Times. I mean, that really fascinating question that I love, and Dark Times is one of my favorite stories of all time. Dark Times Dark Times entirely depends on the prequels to exist, right?
Exactly.
Completely, or else we don't know what's going on. And to say it opens up, and the fact that created the appetite for that story, and not just the story details, but the interest for it. We see what it really picks up what George laid down in Revenge of the Sith, especially with Obi-Wan.
Corey, I'd be curious if you've researched this or not, but what was the Dark Horse relationship with like at that time with the Republic comics? Because, and I've heard some tales about this with like one of my friends within the chat right now, talk about like obviously they had to know something because obviously General Grievous is in there. I saw Adventures from the Tartakovsky series is in there.
And Grievous is also in the Tartakovsky, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Grievous is there too. Was it just the comics more going off of just what Tartakovsky was doing? Even though when we get to episode 3, Grievous is like is kind of like I'm out of here. Kind of he's a coward and runs and hides. Kind of more mustache twirly villain compared to some of the stuff like Labyrinth of Evil and even the comic where he's kind of more of a very deadly opponent. What do you know? Like, what was the relationship between George and the comics there, or they were just kind of working off like basic notes? Grievous, droid general. Here you go.
Yeah, I don't really know what they would have been privy to at that point, or how much they were tied into any other production notes that George would have had. There's like there's some connection with the MMP that they like. George wanted certain things to happen, but then the rest of it is just whatever they came up with for the MMP. And then we know that some of those authors, like directly in the multimedia projects, were only so involved. So how much of that was just like, oh, this is what's available right now, we're going to work with that too, versus we're going in and actually planning to work with this in some connected way? I really don't know.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that just always interests me as well. And there's kind of a feeling even early 2008 Clone Wars wanted to work more into that before it kind of gave up. I don't want to, I'm not going to start the whole 2008 versus Dark Horse stuff, but because at the end of the day, like you always say, Corey, even the book decided, let's just put the 2008 Clone Wars stuff in some of our books. Like you got Callista and Ahsoka meeting each other, which is kind of cool. Which I think is neat. As you were talking about the Jedi, another big thing I think that really affected the prequels was the Sith. At last, we shall have our moment of franchise money making. Yeah, Rex was going to be that alpha character from one of the Dark Horse comics. Fun fact.
I do think with Grievous and Asajj, though, like anytime you have an opportunity to have someone fight someone with a lightsaber, everyone wants to jump on that. So like it's not surprising that they would especially really capture people's imagination.
Sure.
Like getting the balance between like, oh, we're exploring the Jedi's philosophy, yeah, we would, but also, have you considered lightsaber battles?
Have you considered lightsaber
Aren't they so cool?
Because
like, the reason why there's like in the space of 3 years, you get 3 Jedi purges happening in every possible published medium. 4 really, because you have like it sort of happens in NJO where the Vong want them, but it definitely happens in Legacy. It definitely happens in KOTOR too, even though it happens off screen kind of. Then you have like the Jedi Purge in episode 3. So like at every possible period they're talking about, there is a Jedi Purge that involves guys with lightsabers fighting other guys with lightsabers. So
is that concerning? Was that disappointing at the time. Because I mean, one of the things I wonder, and kind of talking about this off screen, yeah, like the NJO kind of replicating what full disclosure, I was talking about this with Dom yesterday, and he was talking about how the NJO, they kind of they bring back what Luke was doing, because Luke now in screen canon now he's doing something kind of different, related but different. Is that kind of concerning that they just copied the whole Purge thing from Order 66, kind of like, or is it like, similar to getting the clone aesthetic in Old Republic, for example? This will sell, so let's have a unique angle on it. Or were they able to actually make a more convincing story out of it, is another question, because that's another thing we talk about a lot, is if it's a wonky story idea but you execute it well, then we'll forgive it. I don't know, what was that like? What were all those purges like?
I think people were generally happy. Like NJO happened, like that one in NJO happened before episode 3, so we didn't really know what the details of that would be. And it wasn't like a full purge. It was just they wanted to purge them, and most of them ended up dying. So I think to the extent that people were already kind of like, there was some people that loved it, but other people who were fans of Bantam style Star Wars were upset with the darker tone already. So I think that like having like Star by Star is kind of the story where is the book where most of those deaths of Jedi happen. And the way they did it was a bunch of characters that get mentioned from the young readers novels, like the Young Jedi Knights adventure books, where Jaina and Jason would get a new friend every week on whatever planet. Like there's the mermaid planet, and they go and I think she's from Junior Jedi Knights, but they made a centaur friend, and then Anakin and Tahiri made a mermaid friend. And then you get to Star by Star, and this is the first time you're hearing about them in an actual Star Wars novel. You haven't read about these guys for 10 years and you were a kid, and the first thing you're seeing is, oh, they got mauled by a wolf on this other planet and they're dead. So I think for some people that was a bit much. But like for for like KOTOR 2, people are generally pretty high on like, oh, the Sith triumvirate there, like Scion, Kreia, and Nihilus. So the story was interesting enough for that. But I think when you get to Legacy, and it's literally just Darth Crates coming, like new Sith Emperor, killing everyone, edgy Skywalker, I think that one was probably not the most well received either.
Order 77.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I talk about the Vader mask a lot, and how that's 3-4 times, and the idea of Vader versus Anakin, that's been repeated a few times. Yeah, you can. I mean, it's being some of the most compelling storytelling in the new canon. So yeah,
it is interesting when you kind of look at it from like a macro scale, like how much. Well, I mean, it's sort of like, I mean, this is what I think the Essential Guide authors do a pretty good job of trying to make the fact that a bunch of different authors all wanted to tell a Jedi Purge story, kind of had to like kind of make it work in like a single cohesive history of like, I mean, and they do. I think they do a good job of like saying, oh, the Jedi have had their ups and downs, but they always bounce back. I don't know, sometimes worse than others, but they bounce back. I mean, I think because in a weird way we haven't expanded that much yet. We only have like one redux of Rebel versus Empire again, and hopefully we won't. Like hopefully if that Rey New Jedi Order film hits, doesn't open up with the Second Order rises.
The Second Order. Finalist order.
I know.
I should say the KOTOR 2 one actually did come out. That was 2004, so that was before Episode 3 as well. But like, Star Wars has always had the idea of like the Jedi were wiped out. It's not like it was just a surprise that was coming. But sorry, Joel.
I mean, and then there was also the Bane and the Thought Bomb.
Yeah.
KOTOR 2 was 2004. You're right. Right.
Bane and the Thought Bomb and the Sith Purge.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Sith, Joel.
Yes, right. I'm actually going back to Sith. That's another. Those are sort of another big ones that sort of really have their heyday, because of the prequels. Which and this is, and we could probably talk about this in a little bit next week as well. But the Sith, I always find the Sith really interesting because of the prequels, where it's like, where you have Tales of the Jet. You know, you have obviously Darth Vader was always kind of known as a Sith Lord if you bought the toys. They never said he was a Sith Lord in the film because they cut out his lead scene. You have the Emperor, who we have no idea what really was going on with him, even in Dark Empire. Like I'm rereading all the Dark Empire, even Empire's End, just to check. They never say he's a Sith Lord. He goes to Korriban, but they never say he was a Sith Lord.
Only Vader was until the prequels, when we find out that they weren't. Like, Zahn wanted to do the Nogri were the Sith, so no one knew.
And then you got the Tale of the Jedi stuff, where we see the Sith, and then we get the Korriban Sith. But
like
again,
it's just the red Sith species, those red skin.
Right. But then it is until Phantom Menace where like the Sith, they use the term the Sith. They become the big thing with Darth Maul, and then obviously we find out the Emperor was a Sith Lord. Obviously, with Revenge of the that was my Waste Windu when he looked at Anakin, just goes,
"Yeah, fair.
A Sith Lord.
What's a Sith Lord?"
And obviously, as we see it with more obviously Knights of the Old Republic stuff, which have already been kind of, I think in a weird way did a really good job, I think, of kind of building off the Tale of the Jedi stuff with like the back lore almost of like, here are the Sith again, but they're looking a little bit more what we're kind of used to in mainstream Star Wars with the movie with Revan and Malak having the quasi Vader Emperor relationship, not obviously 1-to-1, but you know what I mean. And then obviously by the time you get to Tor, the Old Republic, you got Darth Vader ripoff number 100 with Malgus, thank you. Like, and he's the big character, with Malgus. But it's like I think after that, and as well with even NGO, when they kind of got maybe a little cold feet because of how that went down, they decided, get to go back to Jedi versus Sith because that's kind of the big thing in Star Wars, which kind of always has been, even with Tale of the Jedi. But now it's truly the main story of Star Wars is the battles between the Jedi and the Sith. But Corey, I'll let you take on from there. Like, I'm sure you've noticed that as well with like during and after the prequels, the Sith also kind of become the big. They are the big bads of Star Wars. Like they are the villain of Star Wars.
Well, I think especially at that point with NJO, there are a few things that are more annoying to me that they drop. But like going back to the Jedi and Sith element, it's kind of understandable because like the movies are the big cultural touchstones. Like they're, even if it's not the same canon tiers that they had to come up with to fit everything together at that point, like it's still, most people are going to watch the movies. A good chunk of people, the same group of people, are going to watch the shows, and you want to convert some of those people into people who will go and read the books and comics, because you're very rarely going to get someone who their first entry point is the books and comics.
Right.
So like if you're going to be able to get someone in, you want to match the things that drew them into those. If you're going to Legacy of the Force, which is coming out pretty close on the heels of Revenge of the Sith coming out, like it's easier to get people in if you're saying, oh, there's a new Sith Lord and oh my god, it's Darth Vader's grandson, and someone's going to have a lightsaber battle with him at some point. Like that's it. I understand why they would have done that compared to like Dark Nest and NJO, which had been more in line with stuff coming out a long time after. There hadn't been a movie to really set the tone, because like they were coming out simultaneously, but those expectations hadn't quite been set when they were planning what those things were yet. And you were starting to get back to it with the Swarm War, but you still had the weird bug elements of that. But you were getting a lot more of these are the Jedi. There were Lomi Plo and Welk as the Darksiders in that. So you're always a little bit tied to whatever is going to actually make someone read these books.
I mean, they did with the film, right? I mean, Darth Vader's grandson. I mean, and people have made this parallel lots, right? Even I haven't read anything but Darth Caedus, but Kylo Ren, Darth Vader's grandson. He has a red lightsaber. It's kind of wonky, and he has a duel with the Anakin lightsaber with Rey. Yeah, it makes sense that people will want to get bought in that direction. It's just, I mean, to all the credit of all those folks. I mean, again, I haven't read any of those books you mentioned, but it seems like they at least that's maybe the pattern here. That's the theme, or all these things. It's things that maybe get repeated, get picked up in different ways. Are they able to put an interesting, different spin on it? I mean, I think Ryan Johnson did the best job of having that new spin. But yeah,
It's like
maybe
it's like Balin's always talked about, that darn cycle he's trying to stop. That's why he's going to Mortis. You can talk to the manager.
talk to the manager. Yes, go over the head. Talk to the father. Yeah.
It's interesting that I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this, Corey. That when we do the whole Legends v Canon debates and the nonsense, and like, I mean, I say the nonsense, I'm like you hate Canon. Like, Canon's superior to the Legends superior to Canon because I say so. It's like, well, just enjoy it. Just enjoy what you like, man.
Yeah.
I feel like
John became a much worse writer when he was writing in Canon instead of Legends, I guess. Like, if everything is just so bad in Canon, all the authors that wrote in both, like, are they bad then? Good now? Bad now?
Exactly.
Your point is a great point.
But
I mean.
yeah, but I feel like people say, "Oh, Legends books had a lot more creative freedom than the new Canon ones." And I mean, in terms of like kind of doing stuff with established movie characters, sure. I don't think you can do the NGO again with Luke Skywalker for a variety of reasons, obviously. But they just, or Ray, I don't think they're going to have like a new Jedi Order book series. Well, she might, but not in that way. But on the other hand, Legends also was very much tied to whatever the movies were doing, because at the end of the day, this is business and we got to market these things. So it's like Jedi versus Sith, big. Bring in some Jedi and Sith. We can finagle it because we still want to adhere to what we did before with like the post Endor era. So Mara's still around, although she sadly dies. Spoiler. And obviously, got the old Republic stuff in the past. So let's make it more like the Clone Wars. The Galactic Empire somehow exists 1,000 years before, and there's another emperor. Just any comments on that, Corey? Kind of.
Yeah, like, as long as they are making more movies and shows, then like for a character like Rey, you're probably not going to be allowed to make a major character decision for them. You can have Rey in the books; she's going to be doing stuff, but like, Rey, if she dies, that death is not going to be in a book, and then you're not going to, like, if you're approaching some big name filmmaker, like if J.J. Abrams hadn't worked on Star Wars yet, just to keep using
John Favreau. Let's use John Favreau.
Yeah, well, anyway, like, if you're trying to get them on board to write and direct a Star Wars movie, like, okay, I want to come and tell Rey's next big story, and then you have to tell them like, oh no, she died in like New Jedi Order 17. Yeah, that is somehow Rey returned. That's always a viable option, but
to my point is, even if in these Clone Wars scripts, they'll figure it a way. And now they went on Star Wars.com to talk about it. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, it's just I don't think sometimes it gets framed as like they're lesser canon, and it's not necessarily that the stories are lesser canon. It's just the people who you are most likely to want to write a movie are going to be the ones that have the bigger demands on what they want to do. Like, you're not going to get someone in to write a movie and tell them like, okay, but you also have to stay in line with these other things, compared to a book where you're a bit more likely to have leverage to tell the authors what to do.
Yeah.
Versus,
right.
Yeah, they're not going to want to feel bound by that. In the same way that George wasn't.
Right.
I mean, and that's why now, I mean, they don't want to, do the whole poop storm and just actually let a book author make a big story choice, right? That'll affect things. Otherwise, when that happens, and there'll be, there could have been a whole chaos thing the last 2 weeks. There could have been, a whole fights going on. There was a little bit, right? There was still what's going on, retconning, RIP, like everything. I mean, with Ahsoka in the Ahsoka novel, right? I mean, well, not everything, a few little things here and there.
People are a lot more like,
Yeah.
you kind of just have to expect that there's going to be some kind of conflict, right? Like there's going to be something that's wrong. It doesn't mean that suddenly the entirety of all the context is just gone and the move, like everyone go and burn their copy of Dark Disciple now. It's over.
Oh my! Game over, man. Game over.
But I'll say what's interesting, just going back to the point from before, though, is one of the best novels. This came out in 2009. This is much later. Or 2006, I guess, the Bane trilogy. It was something that had a very clear end in mind, right? That George said, this is the Bane story. Edmonton's Drew Karpyshyn. You can only do you want to write this. I don't know how that came about, but you only do so much. I know. I guess he wrote the games too, so he probably was like, hey, here, take this. But that's the interesting thing about even that trilogy, and about a lot of the new canon, is the way they're able to take those restrictions and find really meaningful stories within them. It's also why, again, with High Republic, why the things don't necessarily don't matter to connect. They're so much freer to do what they want. It's why oh my goodness, Rise of the Red Blade, for example, from everything I've heard, such a compelling story. Doesn't have to have much to do with anything else that would possibly be retconned. So it's again, there's both there. There's a both and there of at least the best Star Wars authors, and this is really what came out. I went to a panel at New York Comic Con all about this, right? With John Jackson Miller and Delilah Dawson. The best ones can find the angle, can find the wrinkle within what's already been laid down, within what's coming, to say, okay, make something feel big, make something feel important. Let me tell you, again, on Wednesday, we have an inkling of what's happened, but here's a character that Kieran Gillen created in a Darth Vader comic, Dr. Aphra, that has gone through such a journey. She feels so big and important to those of us who've read all these comics. Is she does she have any kind of impact on on the events of Return of the Jedi at all? I don't know. Do I care? I don't know. I care that what happens to her in this issue, and I care what happens to her later on. I do hope, we keep talking about this, we do hope she shows up in live action on screen, but for now she's just so written, especially by Alyssa Wong, that it's contained within it, that that already had seemed to have already been there. I mean, again, I'm thinking more, I've only maybe read more of the later Legends. The most beloved book, one of the most beloved books of all Star Wars books of all time, is entirely indebted to the events of the Phantom Menace, right? Darth Plagueis, right? Entirely indebted to that, entirely limited by that, and yet is able to weave such an intricate, compelling story in it, because that's just James Luceno being able to pull out. See, that's the thing, is you can see these things as constraints, or we can see these things as gifts, right? What did George give us? What and that's why the better stories come out after the fact, right? Unless you're James Luceno and you're writing this prequel to Rogue One, which was also really great, but
But I think even just like Dr. Aphra, I think Alphabet Squadron, it's probably my favorite Star Wars trilogy, because they're new characters that are able to go through a lot and explore a lot of different themes that you couldn't necessarily get in a book about Han, Luke, and Leia. And for all the idea that Legends had more freedom for authors, one of the reasons that NJO was started was because it was kind of those three that had to start in one place, end in that place again, because you couldn't really make them change too much. They got Jaina and Jason, so like they grew as a family. Luke got married, but a lot of this like actual character development, like Luke had to stay the same. Like once you got between the books, he was still kind of in the same place. And then NJO was like, oh, are we done with Luke? Can we kill him off? And now it's just the next generation. But because of George not wanting to have him killed off, they weren't able to do that. Whether that's because he thought maybe I'm going to want to explore that in a story eventually, and I don't want the publishing side to have already done that, even though he was probably not going to tell the same story as the publishing side, or definitely wasn't going to tell the same story. But I don't think it even is really a bigger freedom they had there.
This, yeah, I mean, you know, this is kind of the one thing I like about the post-Endor era storytelling in canon, maybe even over Legends, is they're telling about new characters, right? I mean, you know, yes, we know that certain things have to happen, like Thrawn's not around during the First Order time, so we can kind of assume either he ran away or he's dead. I'm going with dead. But, you know, we don't know what's going to happen with Din and Grogu. I mean, I kind of don't think they're going to die, because I think, you know, it's like the money, and I don't want to see little Grogu die. But, you know, it's like, we don't know what's going to happen to Din. We don't know what's going to happen to Ahsoka, you know. I doubt she's going to die too, but, you know, I like to say she'll just head on to Mortis and lay low there for forever. But, you know, the Rebels characters. So, yeah, that's like the big thing there too, where like that is the big criticism of like at least the post-Endor Legends era of, yeah, you're just using Luke, Han, and Leia, and sadly, it's kind of overshadowing Jason and Jaina in the new generation. But that actually is something I actually wanted to talk about again. Again, the silly nonsense of Legends recan is like, oh, this feels like Star Wars. This feels like Star Wars. But I am curious, Corey. You know, as the prequels come out, you know, things like the kind of the ideology of like the Force, the Star Wars, like how it's used, kind of consolidates compared to like the '90s stuff, which I'm going to be reading next week, where, you know, it's like you have Tom Veitch, where the Force is like pure on magic, where like you can turn people's tongues into snakes, and then you kind of cut Tim Zahn's the Force is a little bit more like the movies. They kind of feel more like telekinesis a little bit, and I do wonder, you know, did the prequels kind of change the way the authors had to view the Force and finagle it, like really like adhere to like the philosophies of what balance is and light and dark and that sort of thing as well? Or did that come more like during the canon area, where I feel like more authors are trying to adhere more to like the George philosophy of the Force and all that? Because you were talking a little bit about that with Vergere and NGO stuff.
Yeah, I think that was always very author to author, where like now there's a lot more, for whatever reason, emphasis on exploring it as like the mystical side or philosophical side of it. But like you'll still get some authors that want to go the RPG force power style, like the Dark Fate trilogy had, where like for some authors it's very much like this is our RPG power set. This guy took like 7 skill points in Force Lightning, and Corrin forgot to spec into telekinesis at all.
Whoops!
But
campaign can get a lot harder.
Yeah, but like then you have in Legends coming out of the prequel, or going in and coming out of the prequel era, there was an internal kind of back and forth on what the Force was or should be, where you had Trader with Vergere talking about it, and there's the Force is one thing, there's not a dark side and a light side, the darkness and lightness is within you. And then that kind of evolved into the kind of simplified, is the nice way to put it, potentiate thing that Denning was all over, where like now because the darkness is within you, then Luke can run around using Force Lightning, and that's all okay. But then Jason turned out to be a Sith Lord, so maybe not. But so yeah, had to check the tapes on that one, whether it was doing. But I think at that point it was just more of an author by author thing, whereas now there's a lot more unity on.
Yeah.
This is what the Force is, and that's why Colin Trevorrow got fired.
That's not how the Force works. I mean, again, I think it gets back to what I was saying before about what George gave us in this prequel trilogy. that again created an appetite for exploring it. I think again, a lot of folks went into the creamsicle direction and was all, we gotta be like Sith, like Luke. Oh, why not Luke having Force lightning? Kind of that kind of
It's
thing.
white lightning though, so it's okay.
White lightning, that makes
Absolutely.
it better.
His green electric judgment, which is
Electric
totally
judgment.
fine.
But at the very least, yeah, I mean, to say Jedi as heroes because they're guided by the Force, there could be an appetite for that now, and again, going back to Plagueis, right? Kind of, and well, even the whole, how does Anakin get conceived, right? The Force, the Sith are trying to take control over the Force, which puts it out of balance, and the Force whacks back.
I love that
creates
moment
this-
in Plagueis where Plagueis realizes that sees Anakin is like, uh-oh,
yeah.
we're
So
screwed.
and again, that's 9 years after Revenge of the Sith, but within that time, yeah, there's been this reflection on the Force. Again, I do think there's a real world component here of wanting to tell, wanting to move away from kind of this moral equivalency. That's the thing.
Mhm.
That's the worst part about Grey Jedi is that it is kind of both sidism in a way, right? It is,
Mhm.
I get to be evil, I get to be selfish, and yeah, I think there was a move.
Selfish for good reasons, though.
Selfish for good reason. There was a move to say, okay, I can care for myself and what I need and what I hope for, but that's not selfish. That's care for self. There's a big difference there. Yeah, I think that real world. I know that's a kind of on a personal level, on a societal level, right? To say, okay, cooperation and collaboration. That and maybe I'm getting more of the Star Trek thing, but moving towards that and saying, okay, this is how the Force works. It actually brings us together. Ideally, let's tell these stories. Let's continue to tell these stories, and then that really gets carried on into the new canon in some meaningful ways. Again, with High Republic, but Claudia Gray had to have read a lot of this.
I'm sure they all
new
did
stuff,
to a
and
certain extent. I'm sure
yeah,
they all did.
and then Master Apprentice, she has Qui-Gon saying,
Mhm.
I follow the light because it's a light, and
Right.
and that, I mean, I think that's my sense is that that's in continuity with what these novels have laid down. I hope.
One of the last things I want to discuss with you, and I'm curious, Corey, what you know for your research is, or just your kind of your vibe maybe is, Matthew talked about, authors using what George gave us. Do you notice any authors or any storylines where you kind of feel like, oh, these authors did not like the prequels and they're kind of doing their own thing, or they want to do their version of it to a certain extent? Because, like, we talked about the multiple Jedi purges. I wonder if there was any someone didn't like how Revenge of the Sith turned out and thought the Jedi purge was going to be way cooler. Because there's sort of, I mean, especially if they were like the '90s kids who thought, oh, the Jedi purge was a lot longer. And Darth Vader and the Emperor personally hunted down Jedi. Just imagine Palpatine with his cane, and just Vader just kind of on the field, like, hey, I just think of Jedi. I think it's got a team over there.
Electric justice.
Or I mean, I don't think Denning didn't like the prequel, but I see a little bit from what I know of that era of like the Legacy of the Force, not Legacy of the Force stuff. There is a little, I feel like Jason Solo is kind of what people kind of thought Anakin was gonna be, where it's like his dark side fall is a lot more philosophical and a little bit more, I'm doing this for justice. I'm not really evil, even though I'm totally doing evil things, compared to what we get in Revenge of the Sith, where it's kind of boiled down to, my wife's gonna die if I don't do this. I need help. Palpatine, I'll turn on everyone. I'm gonna kill everybody just to save my wife. Do you think or notice like any sort of like, we're making these stories because we want to do the, I guess, the prequels but better, in some of that kind of that more negative kind of, I don't want to say spiteful light, but kind of that, we kind of want to do our version but cooler. Did you any thoughts on that?
I mean, for some of the themes or interpretation of the Force, there was definitely people who saw it differently than what came out. Like preemptively, there's Stover in Traitor writing based on like writing Vergier as a Jedi, or what he thought would be a Jedi based on what like Obi-Wan and Yoda were saying in the original trilogy, and that ends up being a very different. Like, I don't think it's like George doing a full 180 on anything. It's just there was such a limited amount of information that what Stover came up with ended up not being what George was going to go for.
Yeah.
But I think like philosophically or politically for Denning, especially coming in when he did after the prequels, I think like without getting too far into it, I think George or I think Denning is a Bush era Republican and George is not.
Yeah.
So there's some definite.
I mean, I've gone there, so if you want to go there, go for it.
Go ahead. We are full on politics in this podcast. Go ahead.
I mean, like you can see a lot of that with some of the earlier authors as well. Where I think Denning, because I've seen a lot of Denning on social media talk about like being a Republican before Trump, and like I think the way he writes about the New Republic, writes about like the Empire, like you can see where his worldview is coming from, and where like even with Outbound Flight with Timothy Zahn, where like he is explicitly writing about the Iraq War and like he's justifying the Iraq War, where George would not, did not, and was writing the prequel trilogy about how Bush was bad and how Reagan was bad, and
Nixon was bad.
Yeah, Newt Gingrich was bad. Like George was not subtle on any of these points, and you have a lot of these more prominent authors that are writing a lot of Star Wars that are very much not coming from that direction, whether they think they're coming from it apolitically. Like when Zan's talking about how he wrote Outbound Flight to be like, oh, this is my commentary on Iraq, but I'm not telling the reader what to believe. Like you may not think you are, but it's very evident in the way you're describing the two positions here, what you think is or isn't a valid point to be made. And I think Denning comes across very similarly in that. And I don't know if Denning can help but to do that.
I mean, is there a sense, because here's the thing is, you know, I'm sitting here in Canada in 2024 being all, Iraq war, I was all never in favor of that. Is there a sense that at least there's room for that kind of argument, that kind of storytelling? I mean, I'd say especially when there is the rebels are the libertarians and the empire is, I mean, the Viet Cong, right? I mean, yes, the main argument with George is that the empire is American expansionism, but you can make this argument the empire is those who want to centralize government and centralize means of production, or centralize or just have more environmental regulations and raise taxes so you can have more civil infrastructure, and the social democracy, and that's taking power away from the local government, local communities.
Try to nationalize the farm.
So there's that. Is there, with a similar thing saying, with Denning, with Zahn, was there at least a sense of, okay, trying to contribute something intelligent in that discussion, or was it kind of banal and just, we gotta defend the troops, national security, and gotta go grab our resources or whatnot?
I can't really speak to what Stan in particular's wider beliefs are than Iraq war support in 2003, or at least in that direction. Which,
to be fair, Hillary Clinton was in favor of the
Iraq war. At that point in the States, that was a much more popular proposition, at least in 2001. By 2003,
or no, she was in favor of Afghanistan, right?
Yeah, everyone's in favor of Afghanistan. In 2003 was the invasion of Iraq, and fewer people were in favor, but it was still very much war on terror. Like, everyone is supposed to support this. That's the patriotic thing to do. But I think that's not that's what the
I get
political culture. But like I don't know, like I don't know how much more Zahn would align with Bush in other things,
Mhm.
but like I think there's a very distinct flavor of the Empire you get from them,
Mhm.
where there's like the things that made the Empire bad is just Palpatine. Like once you get rid of the
Evil
uh
wizard.
yeah, like you have the honorable men of the Empire like Pelion, who
Mhm.
he's actually a good guy after all, even though like the first thing he does is do a racism to Rook. And like you're getting the other Imperials that are complaining to Pelion of like, oh, why are we negotiating with these with the New Republic of these alien lovers? So like clearly they're not trying to portray it as if like, oh, the Empire's racist and that's a good thing, but there's still more of a willingness to say like, oh, the Empire's racist, but there's these people in here that still see the value in that system rather than seeing the systemic issues that I think other perspectives would take from it. And I think that's the biggest difference in how they come from it, where like there's still a lot of stories that that Zahn would tell or that Denning would tell or any of them would tell
Yeah.
against like authoritarianism that
Right.
I'd end up agreeing with more. But there are certain other themes that they go for that I think really do stick through that show this disconnect from how George would structure his stories or where he saw value in including those themes.
True.
Let me ask, not to get too far ahead to probably future podcasts, but did Denning see Jason Solo as an anti-hero almost in a way that
Mm.
we're never going to get, and probably never will get, someone who sees the Sith as the anti-hero? Like not even Kylo Ren was necessarily the anti-hero. I know some people think that, but like no, he was very much the antagonist. Even if he got redeemed, he was still the antagonist. Um, I'll be very curious to see Acolyte, but I don't think they'll let the Sith
I
are
wonder
still the
about that.
bad guys at the
Yeah.
end of the day. But do you think Denning and in that time were almost allowed to show, and they thought like Vader and Jason were like almost like anti-heroes compared to like I don't know Exar Kun style or Palpatine style, just mwaha evil Sith lords. And then you got Plagueis, which is his own, which I think is actually the most nuanced Sith, even though he's
Yeah.
still bad.
Yeah, like Jason's kind of interesting because like the at the start, I think all of them were on board with the idea that like Jason feels like he's doing the right thing because they're trying to show
Mhm.
someone who is conscious of what he's doing going into Anakin's position and deciding like this is my only option to stop this horrible future I see.
Right.
Which so I think they do see him as an anti-hero in that sense, but I think all of them, including Denning, were on board with the idea that like Jason was not right to do any of the things that he was doing by the end of it. Like he had fully fallen until the moment that he decides to like use his to rather than fight Jaina, reach out and save his daughter.
Right.
But like because I don't think like Denning's position there was such that he's going to overtly say the bad guy is the good guy so much as
Mhm.
the way that someone like Pelion gets rehabilitated involves less rehabilitation for him in the direction that might really reflect some of his worst positions than what another author might do.
Mhm.
Like all of the authors were seemingly on board with the idea like Jason started out as a good guy, had a good goal in mind, and then fell to the dark side because the dark side is the dark side, and that's how stuff happens. But like he'd been through a lot, he'd been tortured a lot. Like I think they were all kind of thinking he was coming from a messed up position, wanted to do the right thing, and his whole framework had been changed by what had happened with Vergier and the Swarm War. But
Yeah, I mean that's kind of to go back to what we talked about at the very beginning with Dark Empire.
Mhm.
That's something I don't think new canon Star Wars will ever do unless they get really crazy and like there's never going to be a good Empire. Which I mean I'm glad. I don't, they went First Order.
Yeah.
They're not going to do the whole purge now that the Empire's purged of Darksiders. We can now be good people, but still Imperial. I mean, look at Thrawn.
well, that's the Imperial Knights, right? They were the bigger one in Legends, where it's like the
Hmm.
dark side Empire Jedi that are full on in that, even more so than like Jason.
Yeah.
I found it funny. When watching Ahsoka, it's like, well, the Sith are dead, so Thrawn's going to bring another dark side cult to help out the Empire. Bring in the
Yeah.
Night Sisters.
Night Sisters. I mean, yeah, well, by definition, right? I mean, Star Wars is made by people who try to live in a democracy, in a time where in a country where democracy has been threatened, and this year, hopefully not threatened too much again, but you never know. Yeah, it's a pretty clear thing of democratic institutions norms are a good thing, and to erode that or to have a system of government that I mean what I would be curious, not an empire, but a monarchy, you have other systems, smaller scale systems that aren't like
George has always been
representative
odd with monarchy. I'll just say that.
it has, and things are not necessarily representative democracy, but um a benevolent leader who calls the shots that still has other mechanisms for wide-ranging input. I mean, you
I guess Alderaan is a benevolent monarchy.
yeah, like Alderaan. I mean,
think.
Justin Trudeau, whatever you think of him, he calls the shots. That's the way our Westminster system works. At least I mean, now that he has at least the confidence of the House of Commons, right? And that's again by definition that city over there that you're in, Corey. But it's still, we have democratic institutions, right? I can say, oh, he did this really stupid thing, he's not going to come and arrest me. We're never gonna. Star Wars, thankfully, will never say. Yeah, again, I think they've learned their lesson for those kinds of things.
Well, what's interesting and something you've brought up, Corey, and I brought up too, just because you brought it up in your videos of like how modern Star Wars has gotten a lot more less official institution and more communal and over the years. Would you like to explain that to the audience back home?
Like there's a lot more emphasis on like grassroots organizing than there was in the past, where like it's harder to I think just fundamentally with a lot of stories where you're trying to tell especially something that has like multiple story arcs, then you're gonna get towards a kind of fictionalized version of the great man theory of history, and you're getting almost unintentionally, just by definition, getting more authoritarian, because you have these characters that are your heroes in either the government like Leia or in the military like Hera. And as the audience, we're watching them and thinking like, yeah, we know they're right. Why are we going through anything else to like anyone who's a check or balance on them is by necessity of the plot an antagonizing force. So you have like Senator Giono, who is clearly just kind of an asshole and has to be because he's an antagonist in the show. But if you just think about the basic situation of like, this is the military leader coming in and saying they want to be able to do whatever they want. And the way Star Wars kind of has to structure it is a story where like, yes, this is allowed, even though in the real world, that's very much not okay. And like Mark from the Templin Institute jokingly called Hera a fascist and like was commenting on that. And people got so angry because they were missing what his point was with that. But like I think that's just a danger you get into with it. But then you have some stories that manage to do it well, like I'm going to give The Rise of Skywalker credit here, where the idea of having it just be people coming together, that's something that is like kind of goes against that. You're keeping the heroes involved, you're keeping a very central focus on like the Skywalker family and like those characters, with Rey and Palpatine being the big showdown, and that's what ultimately matters. But you're still getting more agency for people, more of an idea that this reflects the will of the galaxy rather than just being the personal struggle between two opposing forces to be the galactic rulers.
They heard Palpatine coming back, and they're like, "Nope, we're done with the bleeping Sith Lords."
I was gonna say, about that video. And to be fair, okay. I mean, the title was the title, but I get the point. That that civilian control over a military is vital to a democracy. And I was about to say, it'd be good to see a story that just simply wasn't the story in Ahsoka, and like you were saying, they had to frame it in that direction. And thankfully brought in Leia, or 3PO, but Leia to have it was within the civilian legislative oversight mechanisms that enable Hera to do what she's doing eventually, after the fact.
Mhm.
But I was gonna say, it'd be nice to see a story where, there is civilian control over the military and civilian check over the military, in Star Wars, and where there maybe is even here's a thing, a benevolent chancellor who, is democratically elected, who can go to the Jedi and say, hey, can you help me out with this problem I have? There's this whole pirate gang out there in the Outer Rim, they're wreaking havoc and they're causing problems, and they have this massive storm wall that they can actually move. Right? I'm talking about High Republic. But I'm talking about Eye of Darkness, especially. And that's the question that's come up is, that here is this before image, getting closer a little bit to, away from George's skepticism of those institutions, a little closer to maybe Gene Roddenberry's sense of those things. But that's okay. I mean, that's partly why it's good that it's the High Republic is the before image. In a way, because then they can say, oh, look how, I know, Joel, you don't fully track with this, but I think the 200-year historical point is, look where things got, where that is a problem. But
I think it's something that High Republic does with a varying quality, I guess, between different books, where in a lot of them I think it handles that really well, but I think like Eye of Darkness in particular went too far in trying to say, like, I would like to make absolutely clear that none of this is the Republic institution's fault. It's all the people outside. There is no causality between how people might feel about the Republic and what we are doing. And
as in, like, not blaming the Republic for the Nile.
Not necessarily blaming them for the Nile, but just like so explicitly making sure that we, the audience, through Lena So's speech, was it Lena So? Yeah, it must have been, because it was Phase 3. Knowing that, like, we need to highlight that there may be problems with the Republic, but we're not talking about those today, because these people are actually, they want nothing, they're doing nothing, they're just, the fact that the opposition group here, which is like clearly a stand-in for like MAGA Republicans, like they were always going to come around doing this way, and we have no actual conception of what they want. And I feel like there's a destructive element to that attitude as well, of like trying to divorce it from any amount of like cause and effect. Not that they're right about anything they're doing or right about anything they want, but that they just came out of nowhere, and this was entirely outside of our institution's abilities to prevent.
Yeah,
I think that comes through more in George Mann's book than it has in like anyone else, especially DJO's, who I think is a lot more in tune with the other side of that.
Yeah, I mean, you see what he's talking about in real world issues.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see then if they actually address that, if they go into that, and how the Nile, what the Nile's grievances are against the Republic for real.
Yeah. Well, I think Phase 2 handled it a lot better, of like grounding where these people on Iram and Arono had issues, even if like you knew they weren't right in what they were doing. You could understand where the flaws in the institutions were coming from, and understand that it wasn't actually perfect for everyone. So hearing people talk about how actually we're perfect, there's nothing we could really be doing better, is kind of destructive and just going to make people want to do worse stuff.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, that was a good talking about philosophy. We'll say that. And I guess I'll wrap it up with kind of the last kind of big point here. Well, let's just actually look at the comments first. I was thinking, for me personally, sorry, Corey, about your head. Personal enjoyment. The reason I love Legends so much is because it's adventure with our main heroes. I don't really care about the side characters. Okay, so you're more of a Legends because you like seeing the main characters. I mean, I get it. It's kind of cool seeing the Luke play adventures. Oh my. I agree with a lot of you guys are saying. I think the reason people get so riled up is because Lucasfilm pushes the idea of pretty much ironclad canon, where they make changes when they need to. I mean, I guess that's kind of true.
Yeah, I just want to jump in with and this is Ben from Outer Rim Transmissions. Shout out to those guys. The podcast led by Chris Abbott. So there we go. The fandom fam. Yeah, and this is the point I did was good to highlight. Yeah, that's true. People did like those characters, so why not keep them going? I mean, compelled by them.
Mhm.
Yeah, maybe the point with NJO, they could have had a better balance, and that in new canon they're getting to a better balance. I mean, all the comics from New Hope to Return of the Jedi are all, well, I mean, the main line, the ongoing line, Luke, Han, Leia. And we're gonna see more of Luke. We know that we're gonna see more of. We'll see Leia eventually and Han eventually. So
Like, I'm bringing up Stover a lot, but he talked about the kind of that going on where he'd been asked to write a Luke, Han, or Leia book, and he said he didn't want to because what could he bring to the characters because they'd been explored so much.
Yeah.
But then he ended up writing Shadows of Mindor as kind of just a fun adventure for the three of them because it had been so long by that point that what had been written that was just kind of them off doing something kind of zany. So yeah, there's definitely room for all of it.
And I think that's partly what's happening with new canon, right? With screen, it's just waiting for the time to be right to do it, especially after the sequel trilogy where we saw them.
Yeah, I know it's interesting, and I won't, I want to make this too long, but like, like, especially like where to put them because it's sort of like it's one thing to do like a zany fun adventure with them, but if you're gonna do a TV series, be it live action recasting or animation, which I hope it's animation, you still kind of have to tell an arc, kind of an elongated arc. It's just, I mean, you can still have some wacky adventures, obviously, but serialized storytelling, you're kind of expecting a grander arc. I mean, I want the story of what happens to Luke's academy and kind of that elongated storyline for sure.
I think we'll get that eventually. Yeah.
I can see why maybe they wait on that quite a bit. But
just want to this comment here, also by Ben about political perspectives of authors, and to say there could be an argument for that sort of storytelling because it's whatever inspiration the creator of the story is coming from. There's a point of view, and again, that's the thing. My question behind my question about Zahn and Denning was, okay, did they do it intelligibly and meaningfully, or did they just bring in tropes? And I mean, from what my sense
Karen Travis is doing,
there's that. And my sense is, with Zahn especially, did it meaningfully and intelligibly. Again, I think there is. I'll be on the internet here. There is room for conservatism in Star Wars. Well,
one of the other things that Zahn does really well is like something that Zahn does, regardless of any of his other political beliefs, is that he's been someone that people have latched onto for good portrayals of neurodivergent characters recently. So for all the issues I have with like the Chiss ascendancy as being this weird little xenophobic hellhole in the middle of the unknown regions, like there's a lot of value that people have in Thrawn in that era as a character who is being portrayed as meaningfully neurodivergent that has gotten a big fan base for that.
Yeah, that's good too.
Yeah, and I've always talked about how, while I think projecting a little bit too much on the prequels of the Jedi or the Catholic Church, that was not George's intent. If you want to write a story where that's like the allegory in your individual Star Wars, I don't think that's necessarily a problem, especially if you do it intelligibly.
I mean, you know what, I'd go for that, right? That's I'd eat that up, and that wouldn't necessarily have to be conservative, but would still be tradition minded. Here's another comment by Ben, if I can find it here, about Master and Apprentice. That's the thing why I love Master and Apprentice, is it's so it hits on some of the more traditionally minded, and with Qui-Gon especially in that hits on those things. So
sorry, Court, you were going to say you wanted to.
Well, for a lot of it, there might be allegories that aren't intended or comparisons that aren't intended that just kind of leak in from being part of the general culture. So one of the interesting things about having so many different perspectives in books is that you don't really know what's going to be added by the author intentionally and what else is going to just be like the background framing that's obvious to anyone else who's reading it, but might not be obvious to them because that's the environment that they're kind of thinking is the default.
You're
I
right.
do it all the time. I had a whole podcast where I did that, and I do it sometimes now. One last comment here, and then we can go into your last point there, Joel.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, welcome.
Welcome.
To the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel, etc.
Yes.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the final point is, if I have to give like some real credit to something about new canon, which obviously is not, it's an unfair advantage, unfortunately, because of how Legends developed. But I do like the integration of the prequels into the new canon in kind of a grander sense, from the start. Obviously, again, you can't blame 90s era Star Wars comics and books for not doing that. I mean, I love 90s era Star Wars comics
Time
and
travel.
books. I know, yeah, time travel, but it's sort of like watching The Mandalorian and like seeing as much as we can talk about the Lizzo episode. It's like, hey, B1 battle droids, that's cool. So seeing those guys around a lot and just Din flying a Naboo starfighter, that's kind of awesome. Kind of even Palpatine's return more in the expanded stuff. Built around Rise of Skywalker does talk a little bit about Plagueis and what he was doing. Not a lot compared to the actual book, but you get a sense that they're definitely fans of that material. And it's like the Dark Times era. Obviously, you get to see more of it and see like, oh yeah, here's the remnants of the prequel era still around to this day, and with Bad Batch and Andor, and kind of even Ahsoka.
Live action Clone Wars.
And kind of my hope in future post Andor material, not Mando related, but maybe more New Republic centric, is what's Mon Mothma thinking about when she's establishing the New Republic? It's like, well, I don't want to just do what the Old Republic. Oh, what?
How much Perrin sucked?
Yeah, yes, I want to see that. I want to see that, of course. But outside of how much Perrin sucked, like how do I bring back some of these separatist worlds who have been hating on the Republic just as much as they've been hating on the Empire? And it's like, oh well, it's just the same thing. There were things in Aftermath I wish they could explore more, like the Neo-Separatist Union and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, Corey, I mean, I'm sure it doesn't. I mean, sure, I don't think this is necessarily a thing Canon has over Legend in terms of like good or bad, but how have you felt about just kind of seeing a new canon form kind of now with more the full picture and stuff like Luke finding out about his dad slaughtering the younglings 30 years later, probably not happening. And Anakin not going, hey, Leia, I did the thing. Forgive me, please. I did the thing. Like, how have you felt about kind of like seeing the integration now that we've seen have the full picture?
Yeah, it's been cool being able to see Ahsoka interacting with Luke and just all these different eras. Like the idea of like Luke saying the name Count Dooku is kind of always what I thought of as something that like they're in the same universe. They're both big figures in this universe, but it's not something you'd ever really like. It'd just sound kind of weird. And now it does feel a lot more connected, and it wouldn't be as weird to have Luke just throw out the name Count Dooku and at some point. But
he was a visionary.
Luke knows that he's a political idealist, not a murderer. Very clear on this. Not a murderer.
Not a murderer. Just a political idealist. No, I agree. That is probably one of the best things ever. Outside of just seeing, Brendel Huck's sequel trilogy character with Captain Pelion.
That was cool.
Legends icon.
You can also see more like intermedia connections really quickly. Like you kind of had to wait through. If you're a Star Wars video game player in the 90s, you're waiting 10 years to see Kyle Katarn get briefly mentioned in a Legends novel when he is like the video game guy.
Right.
But in the last couple of years, we had like Bad Batch, Jedi Fallen Order, Jedi Survivor, and Kenobi that had a lot that really tied into each other, where you had like the Zepho artifacts in Bad Batch. You had Kenobi showing the path, and then you have Seer and Eno setting up the path. So like there's all these connections that are coming a lot faster and a lot more meaningful than they would have been.
Fortress Inquisitorius.
Yeah. newer.
I mean, Cad Bane, Chrysanthemum.
Yeah,
Not Cad Bane.
Cobb Vanth.
Cobb Vanth.
Got Vance.
The
Yeah.
Starts with a
Chrysanthemum.
C. Start with a C. Cobb
Yeah.
Vanth, Chrysanthemum.
Well, Cad
That's some
Bane as well.
perspective. Yeah, Cad Bane too. But that's some perspective because we're all like, when are we going to see? How are these things going to? When are they going to fit in? Tie in? There are more.
Yeah.
A lot quicker.
Now it's
than-
a reasonable question of like,
Yeah.
like, could we see Asajj Ventress in live action now? Could we see like random? It's not like saying when is Kyle Katarn going to show up in a movie in 1999. That's kind of a stupid question.
Yeah.
But if you were to ask now, like, oh, when is Cal Kestis going to be in a show?
Yeah.
Like, that's like, it could very easily happen.
When is Afra? When is Afra showing?
Yeah.
up? We keep thinking that. So
Yeah,
that's a good point.
I agree. And, people have, and while I do think there are still like I think they probably do want to wait maybe just a little bit to get that final Jedi Fallen Order game out.
Yeah.
So, they don't spoil, especially if like, Cal Kestis shows up in the Mandoverse. It's like, well, now we know what happened. No point in playing. I mean, I would play still because I want to know the story, but you're right. Like, it's like, there was no way, like, outside of like Darth Maul having a double-bladed lightsaber, probably because maybe George saw that in a comic once and thought it was cool, which it is. There's no way, Mace Windu or the other gonna say, you're gonna be like, Sith have returned, like when Exar Kun did years ago. Yeah.
Well, Aayla Secura did show up, but like the idea that it wasn't that, like, it was a thing that if it happened and someone jumped between media, then everyone gets to celebrate because that's a neat thing that happened. But now, like, you could reasonably speculate on whether or when someone could do it because so many are.
Right. And, that's kind of the interesting thing about the High Republic, which I'm going to be so curious about kind of moving forward, and why I said earlier, I think it's the most successful multimedia book publishing initiative is, okay, you've established kind of your baseline, you have your fans. Once that's done, are we gonna start seeing will we see the Force Ghosts of Avar Kriss in Acolyte? We were seeing a little bit of them in the Young Jedi Adventures medium, and it's sort of like,
I mean, we know Vern's coming.
New Jedi Order didn't have its preschool adventure series. Where's the little kiddies have to deal with the Vong because they're not sharing. The Vong they're terraforming the planet and not sharing. Showing off their edgy pain to the kiddies. Where's Norma Noor as the villain of that show? I want that.
Well, we almost did get the Vong mentions in the Clone Wars and the Revan and Bane set up. It's like we were moving in that direction. So it's not like it's necessarily a canon versus legend situation. It's more just like this has been the direction that story has moved in with Star Wars over 20 years. And we're at a point where this is now
right.
That's true.
just a thing to do.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. No, I agree. I do think while it does kind of depend on the author itself, like I think Dave Filoni being kind of the built-in Star Wars nerd is more likely to pull things than an Abrams or even a Tony Gilroy. Although Gilroy was actually pretty good at kind of
never know.
Keeping,
you never know with Gilroy.
Keeping it all together. Yeah, you're right. You never know, and I think that kind of medium hopping has become a lot more prevalent, which is just as you said, where it's been going.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that was it. We talked a lot about the prequels, multimedia, all that good stuff. It was kind of a catch-all kind of conversation, but certainly I think the prequels were very much the start of it. I guess maybe Corey, one last thing. Do you think the prequels were kind of the start of kind of tying it all together? Because it's sort of like Star Wars did have its like second shot in the arm of popularity.
Yeah. You had the extra boost of popularity, but you also finally had that big hole filled. Like there weren't the same questions around like, oh, where did Anakin come from? What are the Clone Wars? Like you had those answers, and now everyone could just run free. George was no longer leaving as much off limits.
He gave more than he withheld.
Pretty
there
much.
We go.
Yeah.
There we go.
And even though we don't know what he ever would have done with a sequel. I mean, we know he had some plans, but that was probably that was never he never got to cross the bridge.
Maybe
but
people were nicer.
Yeah,
know.
people should have been nicer.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's true. That's true. But yeah, on that note, I think that's a good place to bring things. As much as I would love talking about the prequels, till the cows come home, till till Jar Jar sings or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. Didn't even
Take-
need to wear my prequels T-shirt. So go ahead, Joe.
I have an Obi-Wan T-shirt actually on me.
Oh,
right
there we go.
now.
You're wearing a Phantom Menace T-shirt. There we go. I mean, I'm wearing
Yeah.
my Attack of the Clones Jedi Temple. So there we go. Who removed the Legends books from the archive? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Nobody did. They're still there. Go read them if you want.
Thank
but
you,
yeah,
Corey, for visiting for being our guest
yeah.
tonight.
So
Thanks for
yeah,
having me.
that was a good time to wrap things up. Thanks to everyone in the comments too. There's a great conversation in the comments. Yeah, we were able to get that, including super chat. Always appreciate that. So let us know. Those comments ain't going anywhere. The comment boxes are going to stick around in all these socials, especially on YouTube, but also Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, etc. So let us know what you thought of our conversation tonight. You can also please do give this video a like and a share. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Got not just one, not just two, but three podcasts right here on this channel. I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, Corey, again, as Joel was getting at, thanks so much for coming on. Great to have a fellow Canadian, fellow Ontarian to talk Star Wars with. Where can they find you on the internet?
Well, thanks for having me. You can find me on Twitter at Corey Loses and on YouTube, Corey's Datapad. Yeah.
Is there a story behind that, like losing your data pad? I don't know.
No, the like my gaming channel is called Corey Loses because I
Okay.
did like some preview videos for something I was working on
Okay.
14 years ago where I was trying to record it, kept losing at the thing I was trying to record. So I was there with the other people working on it with me for like 4 hours
Oh no.
for what should have been a 10-minute job.
Yeah.
And it just turned into a kind of meme from there.
Fair. That's fair. And tell us about TapCaf transmissions.
Oh, yeah. So every Thursday, myself and Eckhart's Ladder host another Star Wars podcast called TapCap Transmissions, where we talk about, we're going through all the books that we can. This week, we're doing Dark Disciple,
Nice.
which is lovingly displayed right over Matthew's shoulder there. So
that one.
There you go. Got it on the second try.
There we go. Another Canadian too, right? Eckhart.
Yes, he's from out east though,
Out
from
east,
Nova Scotia.
Yeah. There we go. Canadian geography right here on the Star Wars
Yep.
Underworld YouTube channel. right on. Joel, thanks as always for guiding us through this discussion, this winding, meandering discussion, but very, very natural and very organic. Where can they find you on the internet?
You can find me at GID2021. Again, GID2021 on Twitter. Sometimes I also take over the at Ion Cannon Pod. Again, at Ion Cannon Pod. And of course, you can always find me on the Star Wars Underworld Discord. I will always respond to you when I can. And join us this week on Friday for game night.
That's right. And the link to the Discord server is just in the description below. Yes. Give it a click. If you don't see that, if the links is some issues with the link, DM us. We'll send you a link instead. Yeah, definitely get in on the conversations. Again, I'm making this every single week. I'm going to say this because I just know it's true. If you get in the Discord and you tag Joel with a question, he's 100% guaranteed to answer within the next half hour.
Pretty much.
I'm not going to put that pressure on you, but you're prettle quick on the draw.
Unless I'm at school.
Unless you're actually doing something, actually busy doing something, then don't worry about it. But yeah, definitely in on the conversations, and those are good conversations in there. Yeah, I share a few things in there too. You can follow me on Instagram and Threads at MNEUG1138, one of those old school social media handles that has 1138 in it still. Why not? Twitter NEUG485, and yeah, at Ion Cannon Pod, EYEONCANONPOD. Again, this Wednesday on the Tractor Beam, talking about Afra. And then the following Wednesday for Star Wars Podcast Day, Chris and I are interviewing Ethan Sachs. So check that out. Yeah, and I think that about does it. Next week, we're sticking with Legends. I'm taking a break. I got an event. I got some other things to do, but next week, sticking with Legends. Red Leader back to chat with Joel about some more of the Tales of the Jedi comic from the 90s. So
before the prequels.
Before the prequels, way before the prequels, written before the prequels, but Jedi stuff. So check that out. Be sure to come right back here, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Mondays, Tractor Beam, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Star Wars Underworld flagship podcast, Thursdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. I don't quite know what they're talking about this week, but I'm sure they're talking about something about screen film news or something. So and yeah, all the questions that they've flown their way, the serious questions that Joel asks, the troll questions that I ask about soccer and other things. But yeah, so stick around, check that out right here on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel and all our socials. So yeah, Corey, again, thanks again for joining.
Thank you
Joel,
so much.
it's been fun. But yeah, let's blow this thing and head home.